Since Mets closer Edwin Diaz suffered a patella tendon injury in his right knee while celebrating Puerto Rico's victory over the Dominican Republic in the World Baseball Classic, there's been a ton of discussion about whether or not Major League Baseball players should compete at the WBC. So let's discuss with a sports writer from Latino Rebels and contributor to the New York Post, Bryan Fonseca. Bryan, you've been enjoying the WBC, haven't you?
As it appears, more than a lot of other people.
Yeah, there's a lot of other people who have not been enjoying it. I wanted to have this conversation with Bryan because I think around everything with the WBC, it's important to talk to people from diverse backgrounds and different cultures about this. And Bryan, there have been people, media personalities, sports journalists, who have stated that after Diaz went down, and what should be noted is a freak injury, that Diaz should not have been playing in a meaningless game. We also saw Jose Altuve suffer a thumb fracture in the Classic. What do you say to the notion that the WBC games are meaningless?
The World Cup isn't meaningless. Any of the World Cups, because remember, there's not just a men's soccer World Cup. We have two more World Cups coming up this year, one in men's basketball and one in women's soccer coming up. The Olympics aren't meaningless. You know what I mean? Like, this is what the World Baseball Classic sort of is comparatively. This is baseball's World Cup. And to call this meaningless, when you see the emotion, you see all the players from different cultures like actually wanting to play in this, including American players, by the way, because you have Mike Trout, Mookie Betts, and a host of others. You look at everything you're watching in the World Baseball Classic, it's why it matters. And ultimately, these cultures, Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, etc., you watch that game, Puerto Rico versus Dominican Republic. It was the end of group play, the strongest group of the tournament, by the way. And fans were partying amongst each other the entire night, with each other, dancing, bringing instruments and things of that nature in Miami, the perfect place to have this atmosphere. And despite the action being way better in the first half of that game, fans were partying amongst each other the entire time, even during the second part of that game where there was barely any offense. And on top of that, you had instances like Venezuela and Nicaragua playing each other. Venezuela blew them out, and then you had fans dancing with each other afterwards, not even on the same team, rooting from the same country. Like, the value of this is really, you could listen to the players, you can watch the fans, and you could just watch the games, and you could feel it. It's different. The energy is different. The energy far surpasses most, if not all, regular season baseball and a lot of playoff baseball comparatively, because we just have a different idea of how to do things in this country that a lot of people from other countries don't necessarily abide by.
And that is okay, and that is fine. And speaking to that, right, there was this video circulating around social media from La Vida Baseball where 6 Dominican MLB players were asked if the WBC and or the World Series was more important to them. 5 of those players chose the World Baseball Classic. Now, some people have publicly said that this is, quote, a problem for Major League Baseball and its fans. Bryan, is this an issue at all?
It's only an issue if you look at things through an American prism, right? And if you look at things through an American prism, you're going to determine that everything here that we do is most important worldwide. It's the reason why I was annoyed in February where people were arguing what's the bigger global attraction between the Super Bowl and the World Cup, which is nonsense, right? And ultimately, these players and the countries that they represent, like, there are going to be more ties for a Dominican player coming from the Dominican Republic and representing the Dominican Republic in the World Baseball Classic than trying to win a championship for Cincinnati or somewhere like that, right? Like, they're going to have more ties to their cultures if they love where they're from. And, you know, not everybody has the same relationship with where they're from initially, right? But ultimately, yes, the Major League Baseball does not have a problem here. I think the fans who are saying they have a problem really just looking at it one way and really looking at it through one prism. And ultimately, Major League Baseball fans have to accept, or they don't have to, but they should accept that a lot of the best players in their league come from different parts of the world and do things an entirely different way. You watch the Dominican Winter Leagues and the Venezuelan Winter Leagues and things of that nature outside of just Major League Baseball, it is a very different atmosphere that greatly resembles the World Baseball Classic as opposed to regular season Major League Baseball.
And should be noted that for those players playing Major League Baseball, because some of the pushback will be that this is not, they're not getting paid to play those games. Well, there's nothing in their contracts that Major League Baseball pays them to that stops them from doing that and playing those games in the World Baseball Classic. And it should also be added, Bryan, that Major League Baseball, they're very much invested in the World Baseball Classic in terms of growing the sport? I think we know injuries at any sporting event are unavoidable, but does there need to be changes as to when the World Baseball Classic is played, or is it just simply is what it is?
There's been talk about them potentially, not the World Baseball Classic per se, but fans trying to say, hey, why don't they play in November, right after the season? And it's like, it doesn't make a ton of sense because this would be the best time to do it. You're replacing spring training for some players, which who watches spring training baseball, if we're being honest, right? I mean, if you're really into pitchers and catchers reporting, all power to you. But I'm not somebody who sits there and watches spring training baseball a great deal. I'd rather watch the World Baseball Classic every 3 or so years. If you're going to put it after the World Series, guys are probably worn down. Guys are probably injured already. It doesn't make a ton of sense. Other players play, like I said, in winter leagues, whatever the case may be. That should be a period for rest. And you're ramping back up at the same time you would anyway, which is around February, March. And instead of being in spring training, you're representing your country in these high stakes games. It's fine. I think the way we have it now is pretty ideal. And I think whoever doesn't like it can get over it because the World Baseball Classic is an awesome event where you can see a lot of these countries be represented. And a lot of the players who represent, like, look at the stories that we have. Randy Arozarena, for example, who wasn't somebody who's born and raised in Mexico, but defected from Cuba to Mexico, became a Mexican citizen, and is somebody who has really powered that team into the Final Four of the tournament. They beat my Puerto Rican squad in the quarterfinals, which I'm still a little bit salty about, if we're being honest. But you get these great stories that come out of the World Baseball Classic. This is not something you can just, hey, let's not do it anymore, or let's do it at this time. It's like, no, it is what it is. People love it. The players love it. The players, including the American players who play in Major League Baseball, they love it. That's why they're representing their country. Just let it be what it is. This is a great tournament. Injuries happen, unfortunately. It's part of the game. And, you know, it's going to happen in spring training regardless because look at Brandon Nimmo. He got hurt, and it wasn't in the World Baseball Classic game. He did it in spring training. So it is what it is. It's part of the game. And this is where we are.
And you know what's about those spring training games, Brian? They really don't count. They really are meaningless. Like, nobody really cares about them. At least the players, there are stakes in the World Baseball Classic games, whether people like it or not. Very good conversation. Bryan Fonseca of Latino Rebels, also contributor to the New York Post. Appreciate the perspective, and we'll talk soon, Brian.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.